What if Alias Smith and Jones was never just about brotherhood in the Wild West? It once made its cast stars almost overnight. But 55 years later, time has rewritten their faces, their fortunes, and their futures. From sudden deaths to quiet lives far from Hollywood, their journeys were filled with unexpected tragedy. Now, let's uncover the truth behind what really happened to them. Ben Murphy as Jed "Kid" Curry. Ben Murphy was born on March 6, 1942 in Jonesboro, Arkansas. At 29 years old, he played Jed "Kid" Curry, the lightning-fast outlaw searching for redemption in Alias Smith and Jones, 1971. His restrained intensity gave the series its emotional gravity and helped turn a Western adventure into a character-driven drama. But the confidence he projected on screen grew out of a childhood marked by hardship. After his father's early death, Murphy grew up in financial strain, moving through small-town Arkansas with responsibilities that felt heavier than his age. He worked to help support his family, carrying quiet anxiety about survival into adulthood. Even while appearing in projects like The Graduate and later earning attention from the Thousand Plane Raid, he battled rejection, repeated auditions, and stretches of uncertainty. Fame intensified what stability he hoped to build. He married Jean Davis in 1969, just as his career was accelerating. As Alias Smith and Jones soared and later series like Griff and Gemini Man struggled to replicate its success, tension filled their home. By 1981, their marriage ended in divorce, leaving Murphy facing the collapse of both a relationship and the illusion that fame guaranteed security. The emotional strain of those years weighed heavily. Career slowdowns in the late 1970s brought sleepless nights and deep frustration as leading roles faded into guest appearances. He poured that tension into competitive tennis and strict discipline. Today, Ben Murphy is 84 years old. He lives quietly in California, occasionally attending fan conventions while managing long-standing real estate investments. With an estimated net worth of around $4 million, built from television residuals and property ventures, he stands as a man who survived both the thrill of stardom and the shock of watching it slip away. Roger Davis as Hannibal Hayes. Roger Davis was born on April 5, 1939, in Louisville, Kentucky. At 32 years old, he stepped into Alias Smith and Jones, 1971, first as narrator and later as Hannibal Hayes after replacing Pete Duel. His arrival marked a turning point for the series, dividing audiences and reshaping its final chapter. That turning point echoed the instability he had known since childhood. Raised in a family shaken by early divorce, Davis moved between homes, carrying a sense of emotional uncertainty that followed him into adulthood. He pursued acting with determination, gaining recognition in Dark Shadows and appearing in The Twilight Zone. Yet the demanding schedules and constant pressure left him drained. His marriages reflected the same turbulence. He wed Jacqueline Smith in 1968, and their union ended in 1975 amid growing distance and ambition pulling them apart. Subsequent marriages to Suzanne Irwin and later Alice Leggett also dissolved, each strained by career demands and shifting priorities. During guest appearances in projects like Bonanza and later film roles, he struggled to balance public life with private commitments. The emotional toll surfaced during years of uneven work. Periods without steady acting roles brought stress and anxiety about financial stability. He redirected his focus into real estate development in California and Kentucky, building and renovating properties while navigating the quiet fear of fading relevance. Now, Roger Davis is 87 years old. He remains active in fan conventions and continues overseeing property projects in the Los Angeles area. With an estimated net worth of about $2 million, sustained through decades of acting, voiceover work, and real estate, he carries a legacy defined not only by a controversial role, but by endurance through criticism, loss, and reinvention. Pete Duel as Hannibal Hayes. Pete Duel was born on February 24, 1940, in Rochester, New York. At 31 years old, he played Hannibal Hayes, the intelligent outlaw seeking amnesty in Alias Smith and Jones, 1971. His sharp wit and emotional depth made the series a breakout success and turned him into one of television's most promising leading men. The success hit a fragile foundation. Raised in a respected physician's family, Duel struggled with depression from an early age and battled feelings of isolation despite academic achievement. He attended St. Lawrence University, but left to pursue acting, eventually driving cross-country to Hollywood with his mother, sleeping in a tent along the way. Roles in Gidget and Love on a Rooftop brought visibility, and films like Generation and Cannon for Cordoba showed his range, yet insecurity and alcohol dependency followed him into every opportunity. His relationship with Diane Ray became both refuge and battlefield. They shared intimate evenings watching Alias Smith and Jones, yet arguments fueled by drinking and emotional withdrawal grew frequent. Duel often described Hollywood as a machine that consumed people, and as the show's demanding schedule intensified, so did his exhaustion. Legal trouble after a drunk driving accident in 1971 deepened his despair, and those closest to him noticed a growing darkness he could not escape. Depression and alcoholism tightened their grip during the final months of his life. On the night of December 31st, 1971, after watching his own show with Ray, he retrieved a revolver and said quietly, "I'll see you later." Moments later, a gunshot ended his life at age 31. His death was ruled a suicide. The funeral on January 2nd, 1972, at the Self-Realization Fellowship Temple in Pacific Palisades drew nearly 1,000 mourners, and he was later laid to rest at Oakwood Cemetery in Penfield, New York. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth was around $1 million, earned from television and film during a career that burned brightly but briefly. The series never fully recovered from his loss and ended in 1973. Dennis Fimple as Kyle. Dennis Fimple was born on November 11, 1940 in Taft, California. At 31 years old, he played Kyle Murtry, the lovable yet dim-witted member of the Devil's Hole gang in Alias Smith and Jones, 1971. His comedic timing added warmth and humor to the Western's tension, making Kyle a memorable supporting presence. Fimple grew up in a modest rural household, the son of an electrician and a beautician. Financial limits shaped his early years, and he worked factory jobs while studying drama at San Jose State University. Acting became his escape and ambition. Appearances in series like MASH and films such as Truck Stop Women and Creature from Black Lake followed, yet he was often typecast as scruffy rural characters. The steady work never translated into major stardom, and long stretches between roles tested his confidence. He married Barbara Noreen Pointer in 1965, and they had a son, Chris, before divorcing in 1970. Though he later kept his family life relatively private, the early divorce coincided with the struggle to establish himself in Hollywood. Even while appearing in productions like King Kong, 1976, and later Maverick, 1994, he carried the quiet frustration of being recognized but rarely celebrated. In August 2002, Fimple was recovering at his home in Fraser Park, California, from injuries sustained in a car accident. Complications worsened, and on August 23, 2002, he died at age 61. The accident ended a career defined by steady character work and resilience. His final appearance in House of 1,000 Corpses was released posthumously, serving as an unexpected farewell. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth was around $500,000, earned through decades of supporting roles across television and film. J.D. Cannon as Harry Briscoe. J.D. Cannon was born on April 24, 1922, in Salmon, Idaho. At 49 years old, he played Harry Briscoe, the lawman working for the Bannerman Detective Agency in Alias Smith and Jones, 1971. His hard-edged authority gave the outlaws a real sense of danger, like the walls were closing in, And that steel on camera came from a life that had already been tested. Growing up in Idaho, Cannon was shaped by an era that didn't forgive weakness. Then World War II arrived and tore the world open. He served in the U.S. Army and carried home the kind of quiet damage that rarely shows up in photographs, but changes a man's voice forever. When he finally stepped into acting, he scrambled to catch up, took any role that would keep him moving. Years later, he could look brutally convincing in films like Cool Hand Luke and still bring tight control to television work that demanded relentless consistency. He married actress and writer Alice McCamley, and from the outside, their marriage looked steady. Two artists building a life with shared discipline. But the work kept pulling him away. Long shoots, guest spots stacked back to back, and the pressure to stay relevant in an industry that forgets faces fast. While he was grinding through prime-time visibility on McCloud, the relationship had to survive the emotional fatigue that comes with always being on, even at home. They stayed together, yet the strain of schedules and creative demands lived in the background like a low hum that never fully stopped. In his later years, the body slowed down, and he quietly stepped away from the constant circuit of roles. There was no headline-making illness attached to his name, only the familiar wear of time on a man who had spent decades playing tough. His last TV appearance came in Law and Order, 1991, a fitting final stop for an actor whose presence always felt like consequence. The silence afterward was its own kind of ending. Cannon died at his home in Hudson, New York on May 20, 2005, at 83 years old, from natural causes. His estimated net worth was about $2 million, built from a long run of film and television work that rarely made him the star, but often made him the threat. Burl Ives as Big Mac McCready. Burl Ives was born on June 14, 1909, in Hunt City, Illinois. At 62 years old, he played Big Mac McCready, the larger-than-life force whose presence could dominate a room in Alias Smith & Jones, 1971. His voice alone could make a scene feel heavier, as if the story suddenly had a heartbeat. But the warmth people heard in that voice came with scars. He grew up poor on a farm in Illinois, working hard early and learning how loneliness sounds when it echoes across open land. Music became his escape route, and he carried folk songs like survival tools, turning struggle into something audiences could sing along to. That grit traveled with him into acting, where he could swing from tenderness to menace without changing his tone. By the time he was celebrated for films like Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and his Oscar-winning role in The Big Country, he already knew what it meant to claw for every inch. His marriages carried their own turbulence. He married Helen Peck Ehrlich in 1945, and they had a son, Alexander. But the relationship ended in divorce in February 1971, a brutal timing as his public legacy kept growing. 2 months later, he married Dorothy Coster Paul, and that second marriage held. Yet it wasn't free of controversy, because Ives's reputation from the McCarthy era never fully stopped following him. Even when families gathered around the TV to hear him narrate Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, there was always a shadow behind the Christmas glow. Then the body delivered the final betrayal. A lifelong pipe and cigar habit caught up with him when he was diagnosed with oral cancer in the summer of 1994. Surgeries failed, and the fight turned ugly. Pain, setbacks, and the slow realization that treatment was starting to feel like torture. He chose to stop further operations, and that decision hit with a shocking finality. Not defeat, but control. Finally, he fell into a coma and died at his home in Anacortes, Washington, on April 14, 1995, at 85 years old, from oral cancer. The exact time of death was not publicly reported. He was buried at Mound Cemetery in Hunt City Township, Illinois, returning to the soil that shaped him. With an estimated net worth of about $5 million, he left behind money, awards, and recordings, but also a haunting contrast. The man who sounded like comfort, and the life that ended in a battle no audience could sing away. Ford Rainey as Teschmacher. Ford Rainey was born on August 8, 1908, in Mountain Home, Idaho. At 63 years old, he played Teschmacher, a rugged frontier rancher and authority figure whose stubborn loyalty and moral code directly complicated the lives of the outlaws in ALIAS, Smith and Jones, 1971. His portrayal of a hard-edged Western elder gave the episode weight and realism, grounding the story in consequence rather than fantasy. And that stern, weathered authority reflected the life he had already lived. He grew up in the harsh landscapes of Idaho, raised in a working family where manual labor was not optional but expected. Before acting ever paid a bill, Rainey worked as a logger, fisherman, carpenter, fruit picker, and oil tanker hand. World War II then placed him in the U.S. Coast Guard, exposing him to loss and the quiet psychological strain veterans rarely discussed. After the war, he built his career step by step through radio, theater, and film roles in White Heat and later The King and I, eventually becoming a familiar face in Western television series like Gunsmoke and Bonanza, often cast as sheriffs, judges, generals, or fathers. Rainey did not marry until age 46, when he wed actress Sheila Hayden in 1954. Their marriage endured for decades, but longevity did not mean ease. Constant filming schedules, travel between New York and California, and the relentless pace of television work tested the stability of their home. They raised 3 children, Robert, James, and Kathy, while he continued portraying commanding patriarchs and military officers on screen, including roles in The $6 Million Man and later in Halloween 2. The family life remained intact, yet the demands of sustaining relevance in Hollywood never truly faded. In his later years, age and health slowed him. A stroke struck with sudden force, leaving him unable to recover fully. On July 25, 2005, Ford Rainey died at 96 years old from complications of a stroke. The exact time was not publicly reported. He was laid to rest at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery in Los Angeles. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth was approximately $1 million, accumulated through decades of steady character roles portraying fathers, lawmen, judges, and authority figures across American television. Sam Jaffy as Soapy Saunders. Sam Jaffy was born on March 10, 1891 in New York City. At 80 years old, he played Soapy Saunders, an aging con artist and clever manipulator whose schemes entangled the main characters in ALIAS, Smith and Jones, 1971. His performance as a sly, streetwise elder brought both humor and tension, making the outlaw world feel unpredictable. But his own life had already been shaped by survival. Born to Ukrainian Jewish immigrants on the Lower East Side, Jaffy grew up in poverty, surrounded by Yiddish theater and immigrant struggle. He studied engineering and worked as a mathematics teacher before returning to acting, rising to prominence in films like Gunga Din and Lost Horizon. His performance in The Asphalt Jungle earned him an Academy Award nomination. Yet the 1950s blacklist struck hard. Accused of political sympathy, he was barred from major studio work, a punishment that nearly erased his career despite later roles in The Day the Earth Stood Still and Ben-Hur. He married opera singer Lillian Thais in 1926, and their life together ended painfully when she died of cancer in 1941. Years later, he married actress Betty Ackerman in 1956, 33 years his junior. Their marriage endured, and she stood beside him as he fought back into Hollywood through television work such as Ben Casey. Even while portraying wise fathers, scholars, and religious leaders on screen, he carried the memory of exile from the industry that once celebrated him. Cancer returned as his final adversary. In the early 1980s, the illness weakened him steadily. On March 24, 1984, Sam Jaffy died in Beverly Hills at 93 years old from cancer. The exact time was not publicly reported. He was cremated at the Pasadena Crematory, and his ashes were entrusted to Betty, later buried with her at Williston Cemetery in South Carolina. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth was around $3 million, earned through decades portraying fathers, scholars, villains and spiritual leaders in both classic cinema and television. John Lurmer as telegrapher. John Lurmer was born on May 7, 1906, in Canton, Ohio. At 65 years old, he played telegrapher, the town telegraph operator who receives, reads, and relays urgent wire messages that trigger the chase and raise the stakes in ALIAS Smith & Jones, 1971. His brief role mattered because one telegram could turn the whole town against the outlaws in seconds, and the man behind that counter had already lived a long road to the screen. He came from a stable, middle-class background, but acting was not his first life. He worked other jobs, built experience in theater with the American Theater Wing, and only later became the familiar guest star face viewers kept seeing everywhere. That late start forced him to accept small parts again and again, yet he turned them into a signature, especially on television. He appeared repeatedly on Perry Mason as a medical examiner, then became unforgettable to sci-fi fans with 3 different roles on Star Trek, including Dr. Theodore Haskins in The Cage, and he left a deep mark in the Twilight Zone across multiple episodes where his voice could feel like a warning. His private life stayed out of headlines, and no public record points to a marriage or long-term spouse. That silence made his work speak louder. He kept returning as judges, doctors, ministers, caretakers, and old men who carried secrets. While his name rarely led posters, his face was often the moment an episode turned dark. Cancer became the real enemy at the end. Even after decades of work, the final stretch still looked lonely. Hospitals, weakening strength, and the slow closing of doors that no audition could reopen. His last years carried that steady decline until the body simply ran out of time. John Lurmer died on March 19, 1986, in Burbank, California, at 79 years old. His estimated net worth was around $500,000, earned through a lifetime of supporting television work, small roles, countless sets, and one last truth Hollywood rarely admits. Some careers don't end with applause, they end with silence. Slim Pickins as Mike. Slim Pickins was born on June 29, 1919, in Kingsburg, California. At 52 years old, he played Mike, a rough-edged cowboy who becomes a volatile ally and threat, depending on who pays him first in ALIAS Smith & Jones, 1971. His kind of character doesn't just fill a scene, he can flip it, turning a calm moment into a gunfight with one look. And the wildness on screen came from a life that started in the dirt. He grew up around dairy farming and rodeo, learning early that pain was part of the job. The rodeo gave him a name, Slim Pickins, and it also gave him injuries, fear, and adrenaline that never fully left his blood. When Hollywood finally noticed, he didn't have to act like a cowboy. He was one. That authenticity carried him into film after film until he became immortal as Major King Kong in Dr. Strangelove, then proved he could steal scenes in Blazing Saddles, mixing comedy with menace in a way few actors could pull off. His marriage was one of the few stable anchors in a life built on constant motion. He married Margaret Elizabeth Harmon, and their relationship endured while he bounced between westerns, comedies, and darker roles that shocked audiences, like the twisted sheriff he played in Poor Pretty Eddie. At home, he was still a man trying to slow down, but work kept pulling him back into the spotlight, and the industry kept demanding the same exaggerated Slim Pickins persona that audiences loved. Then the illness struck, and it was brutal. A brain tumor brought surgeries, weakness, and a frightening awareness that even his legendary toughness couldn't outride this. The decline moved fast enough to terrify the people around him. The energy that once filled screens began to vanish, and Hollywood kept moving as if nothing was happening. Slim Pickins died on December 8, 1983, at 64 years old, after surgery for a brain tumor. His funeral was held at the Presbyterian Church of the 49ers in Columbia, California, and his ashes were scattered over his favorite trail areas. With an estimated net worth of about $2 million, he left behind money, cult fame, and unforgettable images. Yet the most shocking part is how quickly a rodeo legend can disappear once the body finally says, "Stop." Mills Watson, as Blake Mills Watson, was born on July 10, 1940, in Oakland, California. At 31 years old, he played Blake, a volatile outlaw associate whose shifting loyalty threatens to expose and betray the central fugitives in ALIAS Smith & Jones, 1971. His performance added raw unpredictability, reminding viewers that danger often comes from within the gang itself. But that edge did not begin on a television set. He grew up on a ranch near Stockton, raised by a sheep rancher father and a schoolteacher mother, in a home without television where radio shaped imagination. After high school, he briefly attended San Francisco State University, then crossed the Atlantic to train at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London, determined to prove he deserved the craft. Returning to America, he fought for space in an industry that rarely handed out leading roles, appearing in films like Up in Smoke and Papillon while building a reputation for intense, blue-collar characters. Those early struggles forged a seriousness that followed him into every frame. His first marriage to Caroline Mary Mason ended in divorce in 1970, leaving him to raise their son Mason largely as a single father while chasing acting jobs. The separation cut deeply. Long shoots and constant travel strained what was already fragile. Later, he married Sue, who brought stability after years of emotional upheaval. During that period, he found steady recognition as Deputy Pickins in The Misadventures of Sheriff Lobo, yet even success carried the quiet cost of sacrifice at home. By the early 1990s, he stepped away from acting, choosing distance over fame. Now, Mills Watson is 86 years old. He lives in Marcola, Oregon, on a 15-acre farm with his wife Sue, growing hay and embracing a peaceful rhythm far removed from Hollywood. With an estimated net worth of about $1.5 million, he chose calm over cameras, and that final decision may be the most surprising role of all. Time has changed every face we once knew in ALIAS Smith & Jones, 1971. Some found peace far from the spotlight, some fought illness in silence, and some left this world with stories few fans ever heard. Looking at the cast then and now, the transformation is more than physical. It's deeply human. Which actor's journey surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And if you love uncovering what really happened to classic TV legends, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories just like this.